So in today's video, we're going to be building the easiest JavaScript calculator that you've probably ever seen. So this is a super basic solution into building this functional calculator right here. It looks pretty great, right? And of course, you can perform maths using it as well. We also have some exciting news as my IDE of choice, WebStorm, now has a free tier for students just like you, hobbyists and all non-commercial users. So that you can now use this super professional software using all the WebStorm features that paid users have access to. To download your free license, click on the link below now and pause this video so that we can get started, as I will be using WebStorm throughout this video. I've been using WebStorm for over 2 years now, and the super easy project setup has to be one of my favorite features and includes everything you need for JavaScript and TypeScript development right from the start. I will show you how to use it to set up our calculator project soon. We are going to be using a function here that I do not recommend for security reason. It's called eval. Okay, you even get a whole warning about it on most documentations out there because it is a security risk. However, if you're not planning on deploying this anywhere problematic, then I think you should be fine. Okay, this is just an exercise in styling and using JavaScript in general. Okay, so what are we waiting for? Let's do it. And of course, please do keep that in mind about the eval method. If anything, I hope your takeaway from this is this information about the eval method, right? So if anything, I hope you learned that. Okay, so great. And now let's get to building this kind of problematic calculator. Okay, so first off, let's start off with your code editor of choice. As always, I am using WebStorm, but you don't have to. All you have to do is essentially create a directory. So I'm going to do so by creating an empty project. And let's go ahead and just call this JS Easy Calculator. So just like that, I'm creating a directory called JS Calculator in WebStorm projects on my computer. So I'm just going to go ahead and click create, and here we go. It's an empty directory or folder that lives on my computer. So just get up to this point in whatever code editor you are using, and let's continue. Now, of course, we're going to have some files. So let's go ahead and create them. My first file is going to be an index.html file, making sure to give the HTML extension. Now, because I'm using WebStorm and I select a new HTML file, I actually don't have to do that. But if you are not, make sure to add that to let your code editor know to treat this as an HTML file. Now, this has got some boilerplate for me, so that's really good because it's going to save us time. So if you don't have that, just pause here and make sure you have this as well. I'm just going to tab this out maybe so it's a little bit more readable for you. There we go. So great, we have our index.html file. We're going to have two more files, a file called app.js and a style sheet called style.css. So let's go ahead and do that style sheet. I'm going to call it styles, plural. Okay, so I can just go ahead and do that. And then it will create a styles.css file for me, again with the CSS extension to let your code editor know this is a CSS file to treat it like one. And then finally a JavaScript file, so app.js, but because this is WebStorm, I don't need to put the JS extension if I selected new JavaScript file. Great, so now let's link them up. So in the index.html file here, I'm going to use a link tag, a self-closing element, and I'm going to do rel style sheet. And then as the href attribute, I'm going to just get style.css. I could put style.css and I don't need to go into any directories or folders or anything like that, whatever you want to call them, because the style.css file lives on the same level as my index.html file. Same with the app.js. So after we load all our divs, all our HTML elements essentially, then at the very end, we want to go to the script tag, so just like so, and as the source of this, you guessed it, we're just going to have app.js, so just like so. Great. So a few more things to do. I'm going to go ahead and add the HTML that we're going to need. So first off, let's change the title to JS Calculator. So just like that. And in here, well, I'm just going to have a div, in fact, and I'm going to give it the class name. So class of calculator, just like so. And in here, I'm going to have a screen, right? So we're going to style up a div to be the screen. So I'm going to give this the class of screen just like so, and leave that as it is. Then I'm going to have a break to space it out from the next div. So the div like this, and I'm going to give this the class name of buttons, right? Because this is essentially going to hold all our buttons. So let's have one button, and this is going to hold the number 7. We're then going to have the button with the number 8. We're then going to have a button with the number 9. We're then going to have a plus. We're just mimicking what the layout will look like on a calculator. Next, we're going to have, I'm just going to copy this one actually, 4, 5, and then 6, of course, and then followed by another arithmetic operator. So the minus, we're then going to have 1, 2, 3, and another arithmetic operator. So multiply, and then we're just going to have the button 0, a dot, a divide arithmetic operator, and then an equals. But we're going to style this differently, and we're going to actually have to pick this out. So I'm going to give this an ID so we can pick it out. It is unique, and we're going to attach some functionality to this that's a bit extra. And great. Then we're going to have another break, and then we're simply going to have another button, and this is going to say clear. And again, we're going to give this an ID so we can pick it out on our JavaScript of clear. Okay, so if you want to see the full thing, I'm just going to zoom out for you. It will be very hard to read, but just so you can kind of see, this is everything in our HTML file. Okay, so just like that. Now, if you currently view this, I'm just going to show you what this looks like in WebStorm. I could just go ahead and click this button, and it will essentially show me what it looks like. It doesn't look very nice. Or, you know, if you're not using WebStorm, you can just get the index.html file, and then you can get the copy path. We're going to get the absolute path, and then just paste it in here like so. So we're getting the index.html file that lives in the JS calculator directory that lives on my computer. Great. And I'm just going to inspect this so we can carry on and see what's going on under the hood. So now let's go back here. We are actually done with this now. You will also see that the title here should be showing up in the browser tab, and it does, because that is essentially the document name. So cool, we are done. Let's get rid of that for now. I'm also going to minimize this because we're just going to work on the styling and then finally add functionality to it. But let's style it up first. So first off, what we're going to do is just grab the body just like so, and we're going to use display flex to initialize flex box, and then we're going to center everything from left to right using justify content center. Because we initialized flex box, we can use this line, and then we're going to use a line item center to center everything from top to bottom. But for that to work, we also need to give this a height because it doesn't really have a height at the moment. We'll just set it to 100 viewport height. Okay, so VH for viewport height. Great, and let's also give it a background color. Today I've decided I'm going to work with RGB. So we're going to go with 518484. Okay, so at the moment it will just look like this. As you will see, we've centered everything from top to bottom and left from right, and it will stay centered on the page. Great. Let's move on. So now that we've done the body, I think let's actually pick out the calculator this time. So the div that holds all our buttons together. And I'm going to also give this a background color. I have picked this out of a gray, 211, 211, 211. So there we go. And now I'm also going to go ahead and give it some padding of 20 pixels and a border radius of 10 pixels to be precise. I'm also going to grab the div with the class name of buttons. So this holds all of our buttons. The calculator holds our buttons as well as other things as well, but this is just for our buttons. And I'm going to hard code a width of 232 pixels. And now what I'm going to do is actually grab each button. So any element called button, okay, you'll see this is not a class name or anything like that. And I'm going to set a background color. Let's go with RGB 131, 129, 129. I'm going to go with border none. We don't want a border. The color of the text we're also going to set using RGB, and I'm just going to make it white. So 255, 255, 255. The font size, I'm going to hard code as well to be 40 pixels. Let's give each one of these a height of 50 pixels and also give it a width of 50 pixels. Okay, so now it's a square. And then I'm also actually going to add a border radius of 25 pixels, which will make our square a circle. So great, that is looking good. And I think we should also add a margin to each one. So margin 4 pixels to space each button out from one another. So at the moment, it looks like this. Okay, so this is looking good. We also need to add the screen. So there is a div element with the class name of screen. I'm just going to add that here. So dot screen, and our screen, well, I'm going to hard code the width of this to be 224 pixels. I'm also going to give it a background color. Again, RGB, this time is 176, 205, 176. And then I'm also going to give it a font size. So any font that shows up here is going to be 40 pixels. Text align, we're going to do end because we want it to be at the end, so on the right-hand side of the element. And finally, padding, because we want to give some padding around the numbers that show up to space them out from the edge of the screen. So padding, we're going to go with 4 pixels as well. So we go, that is our screen. And now, so if you go in here, I'm just going to manipulate it in here. Here is our screen. I'm just going to edit HTML. And if I stuck in a 1 here, okay, let's go ahead and hit enter. Then you will see there's some padding around the number. Okay, that's all we want. So that is it really. I'm just going to refresh that so we can go back to here. Okay, so we've done the screen, we've done the buttons. The next thing I'm going to do, because at the moment, as you will see, I think it would be much nicer if these are wrapped over each other in the buttons container. At the moment, you know, they're doing some behavior that I don't quite want. I would want them to essentially fill the whole buttons container and then wrap over each other. And for that, I can use display flex. So on the buttons element, I'm going to use display flex. So let's initialize flexbox and hit enter. And if you do that, you will see everything trying to, be squished on one line. We don't want that. So next I'm going to do flex wrap, and hit save. And then, ta-da, that is looking much better. I think for now in the screen, the easiest thing to do, I'm just going to get up my HTML, is just simply put a dot here that we will then override. So if you do that, let's just go back to styling and refresh, that will kind of always have a dot when you load the page before you start writing anything else. Wonderful. I think let's style up some of these buttons a little bit more next. So back in here, I'm actually going to say that each button, so let's grab the button. So maybe I'll make this a little bit bigger. As we hover over the button, I actually want to change the color. I'm just going to change the background color. So the background color is going to be RGB 111, 110, 110. So just like that. And then if we click on the button, so button active, I'm also going to change the background color. So background color and make it RGB 232, 232, 232. So now if we go back here and hit refresh, if I hover over the button, it goes a bit darker. And if I click on it, it goes this very pale gray. So that is something I have just done right now. Wonderful. Let's move on. Another thing I want to do is just grab the element by its ID of equals. We'll be assigning functionality to this, but we can actually also style elements with IDs. So I'm going to pick that button out by its ID of equals. And I'm again just going to change the background color of this to be RGB 21822, so kind of red color. And then also on equals hover, so I'm just going to grab that, and on hover of this item, I'm going to change the background color again to be RGB 19811. So if you have a look at this now, again, that is what the button looks like. And if I hover over it, it goes a little bit darker. Great. And also let's do the same for the clear button. So we'll change the background color of this. I'm going to go with the yellow RGB 252, 226, 27. I'm also going to actually make the width 100% of the parent, so it spans the whole way. And then the font size I'm going to change. The font size I'm going to change to 30 pixels. Okay, and again on the hover, let's have something. So on hover of this, I'm going to do background color RGB 252.201.17. Okay, so great. Again, on hover, it will do this. So this is looking wonderful. I'm happy with the styling of my calculator. Of course, this is so basic. Please take this, make it your own. This is your project. I did this so basic because I don't want to focus on the styling. I want you to give it your own personal flair. Let's move on now. I'm happy to move on to the JavaScript. So let's do it. So first off, what we're going to do is pick out the screen display. So I'm going to save it as the const screen display. And to pick this out, I'm going to use document. And then we're going to use the query selector to pick out one thing, right? We're going to pick out one element by its class name. So dot is looking for a class name, and I'm looking for the element with a class name of screen. So we're looking for it, we found it, we saved it under the const screen display. So if I do console log screen display, it should show up unless you made like a spelling mistake or something. So cool, so now if I refresh, ta-da, we have indeed picked out the element with the class name of screen. There it is, it's got a dot in there because that's what we put in. Cool, so we're picking out, but we're not really doing much with it, not yet anyway. So we picked out one thing. I'm also going to go ahead and pick out everything. So we use query selector. And we're now going to use query selector all because we need to pick out more than one element. If I use query selector, it would have just picked out the first element by this class name. And we're looking for all buttons, right? So we're looking for all elements that are buttons. So let's look for all elements that are called button. And I'm going to save this under the const buttons because it's plural. Okay, so by using query select all, I picked out all elements that are buttons. And if I just use this, you'll just get one. So if you're just getting one, it could be because you're not using query select all. So if I console log out buttons, just like so, ta-da, you'll get a node list. So essentially all our buttons here. And of course, the last one has the ID. So hash means ID and the ID of clear as well. So the idea of equals and the idea of clear have been added to these last two buttons. It's quite handy how it selects it on the left too. So that is a plus. Okay, so we've picked out all the buttons. We've picked out the screen display. Next up, I think we should actually go ahead and add functionality to each button. So let's do it. Let's grab all the buttons. So there we go. And for each item, so for each of the items in this array, so for each item, each button essentially, I'm going to have to grab each item. I'm going to call it button. You can call it whatever you wish. And for each button, so there's the syntax for each, I'm going to add an event listener to it. And that event listener, okay, an event listener essentially needs to take an action or essentially an event, and then it's going to do something. So here is our callback function. So our callback function is going to be to calculate. So calculate, and we're going to listen out for click. So the click is the event that we're going to listen out for. Of course, we need to define this function. So maybe let's define it here, just like so. So there we go. And for now, I could just put console log clicked, just like that. Okay, and this just means that if I click on any one of these, it'll just say clicked. If we want to actually pass through information about what button we clicked, we can actually just pass through the whole button because we're already working with it here. But this means we call the function. We need to make it a callback function again, so it doesn't get called immediately. It only gets called if we click on the button. So now, because we're passing through button into here, we need to pass it through here, and we're going to do clicked button. Okay, so we'll console log the button we're clicking this time. So ta-da, clicked, and then the whole button element I'm console logging out. Pretty cool, right? Great, so hopefully that makes sense. That's how you essentially add an event listener to each of these buttons. Okay, every single one of them has them. So cool, let's move on. Now, say I just want to get the value of this, right? So the text content of each button. I can, because essentially this is an object, I can use dot notation to get the text content. So now I should just console log out the value. Click 9, click 8, and so on. So that's cool. Maybe let's save this as something. So const value equals, and then the button context. Okay, so great. I think that is good for now. One other thing we're going to do is actually save all the buttons that we click in an array. I'm going to make it let because we want to override it later on. Let calculation, and let's make an empty array. And each time we essentially get a value, I want to push it into the calculation array. So all I'm going to do is get that array, and then I'm going to use push, so a JavaScript method called push, to push in the value. Okay, so then after that's done, I'm just going to console log out the calculation array to show you what it looks like. Okay, so bear in mind it's currently empty, and if I click on one of this, click 9, and we're pushing in that string of 9. And of course we can do all of these like so. So cool, that's what we've done. Now it's all great us seeing this behind the hood, but I want to actually show it somewhere, and I want to show it in the screen display. So let's grab the screen display, and once again I'm going to use text content, and if we just do equals and then we get the array and put it like that, I'm just going to show you this. It looks like that. So it's got all these commas, we don't want that. Let's get rid of the commas, okay, before we put it in the screen display. So before we put this array, which currently looks like this, into the screen, so essentially we have to do that here somewhere. I'm going to get that calculation, and I'm going to use join to join it without the comma. So you're just going to do this empty string. Let's maybe also just save this to something. I'm going to say this as a cumulative calculation. Maybe let's also save it up here. Let cumulative calculation, because we're going to have to override it when we clear everything. So now I can get the accumulative calculation and display that instead of that array. And it should look like this. So 9, 8, you will see that's our calculation array, and this is what's being displayed as the accumulative calculation. I'm just going to console log that one out after we've used the join method on the calculation. Console log accumulative calculation. Okay, so once again 9, 8, and you will see just 9, 8 showing up like so. Cool. So this is all good. However, what we don't want is us adding anything into the calculation array if the button that we press was the button of clear, right? So maybe let's get rid of all these console logs. I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit. Okay, great. So before we do any of this, we want to check if the value of the button, so if value strictly equals the string clear, well then we don't want to push anything into the calculation array, or we don't want to, you know, make an accumulative calculation. What we do want to do is just get calculation and just set it back to an empty array. And same for actually the screen display content. We're just going to set it back to be a dot again. Okay, else if, so we check the top one first, else if, then we check this, value equals the string of equals, then we're going to get the screen display content and simply add up everything in the accumulative calculation. Okay, so eval essentially will allow us to make a calculation of anything that is stored under accumulative calculation. And as you saw, this could look like 8, 9, there could have been a plus in there, 5, 4, and we will just essentially use equals on it to get a final result. I'll show you this in action in a bit. Okay, let's make this strictly equals. So we're checking for this first, else if value equals, then we do that. And then finally else, then we do all of this. Great. I'm just going to actually console log a cumulative calculation here before we press the equal sign so we can see what gets passed on to the eval function. So let's say we did 7 plus 9 equals, so right before we press equals, so right before we put the cumulative calculation, because remember that is the value of our cumulative calculation that I just console logged out, we pass that through into the eval method to get 16, and 7 plus 9 is 16, so that works. And of course we could do way more complicated ones like this divided by this equals, and again it gives us a calculation. So that is looking so good. We should probably, crop that. Maybe we just want to do to X amount of decimal points. You could just cut it off, so you could do overflow hidden. Perhaps that's what I would do. Of course, this is a styling thing, so please feel free to do this however you wish. Overflow hidden, and handle overflowing numbers however you would like. So once again, 78. It's going to press loads and loads of numbers. And you will see that it kind of does that. And then you can choose to scroll horizontally. So scroll. That is an option too. It really is up to you how you would like to handle this overflow of numbers. Okay? Cool. So I hope this tutorial was useful in making the simplest JavaScript calculator that you've probably ever seen. Okay, here is literally all the code that we use. I'm just going to maybe scroll a little bit for you. Let's get rid of that console log. But yeah, essentially, there we go. Let me know what you think and let me know how you would take this project, take it to the next level, and generally just make it your own.